I stared at my reflection in the mirror, my fingers gently tracing the outline of the prominent birthmark on my face. The pulsating grief and anger threatened to consume me as the words echoed in my mind. Can't she do something about that hideous mark? It's so distracting. I clenched my fists, recognizing the familiar voices, my own parents. It was supposed to be a celebratory evening, a community event honoring local achievements. But as I had stepped away momentarily, their hushed tones carried across the room, piercing my heart like 1,000 needles. The people who were meant to love and support me unconditionally had once again reduced me to a mere blemish, a source of embarrassment. "She's brilliant, but that face, it's just so off-putting," my mother had whispered, her words dripping with disdain. I could almost picture her delicate features contorted in disgust, a stark contrast to the polished facade she presented to the world. My father's response was equally cutting. "If only she had taken after you, dear, but I suppose we'll have to make do with what we've got." The callousness in his tone sliced through me like a razor, leaving me raw and exposed. As I made my way back to their side, their expressions shifted seamlessly, masks of pride and affection sliding into place. But I saw through the charade, the veneer of acceptance that had deceived me for far too long. That night, as I lay awake in the darkness, a newfound determination took root within me. I would no longer be defined by their shallow expectations or the cruel judgments they cast upon my appearance. It was time to break free from the suffocating embrace of their conditional love and forge my own path, one paved with resilience and unrelenting spirit. The next morning, I methodically packed my belongings, leaving behind the gilded cage they had constructed for me. With each item tucked away, I shed another layer of the self-doubt that had once enveloped me, replacing it with a fierce resolve to prove my worth on my own terms. As I stepped out into the world, the weight of their disapproval no longer burdened my shoulders. I was free, unburdened by the shackles of their expectations, ready to embrace the endless possibilities that lay ahead. And in that moment I made a silent vow. One day, they would understand the true depth of their mistake, and I would emerge victorious, a testament to the indomitable strength that lay beneath the surface they had so carelessly dismissed. Living under my parents' roof felt like being slowly suffocated. Each day another twist of the vice crushing my spirit. Their disdain seeped through every interaction, a constant undercurrent of disapproval that left me gasping for air. "Cassie, dear, would it kill you to make an effort with your appearance?" My mother would drawl, eyes narrowing as she scrutinized my every move. "You're such a bright girl, but that thing on your face is just so distracting." I wanted to scream, to unleash the torrent of rage that festered within me. But I knew better than to challenge her authority, lest I face the full force of her wrath. So I would simply nod, swallowing the bitter pill of her insults, as I had done countless times before. My father was no better, his barbs cloaked in the guise of fatherly concern. "You know, if you just put in a little more effort, maybe the boys would take notice," he'd say, his gaze lingering on the birthmark that marred my features. A pretty face can open so many doors in this world. I wanted to remind him that my academic achievements had already opened more doors than his privileged connections ever could. But I knew better than to engage, to shatter the delicate illusion they clung to so desperately. Even at school, their influence seemed to follow me like a dark cloud. Teachers who once praised my intellect now regarded me with barely concealed pity, their eyes flickering to the imperfection that set me apart from my peers. "Cassie, your grades are excellent as always," Mrs. Henderson would say, her voice tinged with reluctance. "But have you considered, well, perhaps some cosmetic procedures could help you reach your full potential?" I would clench my jaw, biting back the retort that burned on my tongue. How could they not see that my potential extended far beyond the superficial confines they so obsessively guarded? It was during one particularly heated argument that the fragile threads holding our family together finally snapped. I had overheard yet another demeaning conversation, their voices dripping with shame and disgust as they lament the cruel hand fate had dealt them in the form of their disfigured daughter. "Enough," I had shouted, storming into the room with tears streaming down my face. "I'm done being your constant source of humiliation, your dirty little secret to be hidden away from the world." Their expressions froze, a mixture of shock and guilt that quickly morphed into defensive anger. But I didn't give them a chance to respond, grabbing what few belongings I could carry and fleeing into the night. As I stood on the doorstep of Lily's humble apartment, my heart pounded with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. This kind-hearted family friend had always seen past my outward appearance, embracing me with a warmth and acceptance that had been sorely lacking in my own home. With a trembling hand, I knocked on the door, and Lily's concerned face appeared before me. One look at my disheveled state was all it took for her to usher me inside, enveloping me in a comforting embrace that spoke volumes. In that moment, I knew that my life had irrevocably changed. The shackles of my parents' shallow expectations had been broken, and a new path lay before me. One paved with the promise of self-discovery and the chance to forge my own destiny, free from the constraints of their superficial values. The weeks that followed my dramatic departure from my parents' home were a whirlwind of emotions. Lily's unwavering support was a lifeline, her small apartment a safe haven from the storm that had upended my world. "You're safe here, child," she would reassure me, her gentle voice a balm to my wounded soul. "Those people have no idea what a remarkable young woman you are." Her words were a stark contrast to the constant barrage of criticism I had endured for so long. For the first time in years, I could breathe freely, without the weight of their disapproval suffocating my every move. Still, the past had a way of creeping back in, no matter how hard I tried to outrun it. Late at night, when the shadows grew long and the silence became deafening, their voices would echo in my mind, taunting me with reminders of my supposed inadequacies. "Who would want to be with someone like you?" My mother's sneering tone would taunt. "You're nothing but a blemish, a stain on our family's reputation." I would clench my fists, willing the tears not to fall. But the pain was always there, a constant ache that threatened to consume me if I let my guard down for even a moment. It was during one of these sleepless nights that I overheard a conversation that would change the course of my life forever. Lily was on the phone, her hushed tones carrying through the thin walls of her modest dwelling. "They're despicable, treating their own daughter like some sort of embarrassment," she hissed, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "If they can't see what an incredible young woman she is, then they don't deserve to have her in their lives." My heart raced as the weight of her words sank in. For so long I had harbored a glimmer of hope that my parents would come to their senses, that they would see past the superficial and embrace me for who I truly was. But in that moment, the harsh reality crystallized before me. They were the ones who were flawed, blinded by their own shallow values, and incapable of recognizing true beauty. That night I made a decision that would sever the last fragile threads binding me to my former life. With trembling hands, I packed what few belongings I had into a tattered backpack, scribbling a hasty note of gratitude to Lily before slipping out into the inky blackness. The streets were deserted as I navigated the familiar paths, each step carrying me further away from the shackles of my past. I didn't know where I was going, but for once, the uncertainty didn't fill me with dread. It was a liberating feeling, this newfound sense of control over my own destiny. Finally, I arrived at the one place that had always felt like a sanctuary, the public library. Its imposing doors stood as a beacon of hope, a promise of knowledge and endless possibilities waiting to be explored. As I stepped inside, the musty scent of aging books enveloped me like a warm embrace. Here, within these hallowed halls, I was not defined by my appearance, but by the boundless depths of my intellect and curiosity. With a newfound determination, I scoured the shelves, devouring every resource I could find on scholarships, financial aid, and higher education. The path ahead would be arduous, but for the first time in my life, I was the architect of my own future. A future that would be built on the foundations of my own strength and resilience, not the shallow whims of those who had failed to see my true worth. As the first rays of dawn peeked through the windows, I emerged from the library with a renewed sense of purpose. The world was vast and brimming with opportunities, and I was ready to seize them with both hands, leaving the weight of my past firmly behind me. The years that followed my exodus from my parents' toxic embrace were a whirlwind of determination and unwavering focus. With the weight of their judgmental scrutiny finally lifted from my shoulders, I was free to soar, to pursue my dreams without the constant fear of disappointing their shallow expectations. Armed with a hard-won scholarship and an unquenchable thirst for knowledge, I immersed myself in the world of business and technology. The lecture halls became my sanctuary, each lesson a stepping stone towards a future where I would forge my own path, unshackled by the confines of societal norms or familial obligations. "Cassie, your insights are truly remarkable," Professor Reed would gush, his eyes shining with genuine admiration. "You have a gift for seeing beyond the surface, for finding solutions where others see only obstacles." His words were like a soothing balm, a stark contrast to the endless critiques and backhanded compliments that had once defined my existence. For the first time in my life, I was valued for my intellect, my unique perspective, not judged solely on the basis of my appearance. As the years flew by, I threw myself into every opportunity, determined to make the most of the chance I had been given. Late nights were spent poring over case studies and coding exercises, my fingers dancing across the keyboard with a fervor that bordered on obsession. "You're going to burn yourself out at this rate," Eli, my closest friend and confidant, would caution me, his brow furrowed with concern. "You've already proven yourself 1,000 times over. Don't you think it's time to take a break?" But I couldn't afford to slow down, not when the taste of success was so tantalizingly close. I had spent too many years shackled by the limitations imposed upon me, and I wasn't about to let this chance at freedom slip through my fingers. The day of my graduation was a triumph unlike any other. As I crossed the stage, my diploma clutched tightly in my hand, the weight of my accomplishments settled upon me like a warm embrace. This was more than just a piece of paper. It was a testament to my resilience, a defiant middle finger to those who had doubted my worth. In the crowd, I caught a glimpse of Lily's beaming face, her eyes shining with pride and unshed tears. She had been my steadfast champion, my unwavering source of support when the world had seemed darkest. And in that moment, her presence was all the validation I needed. As the ceremonial proceedings drew to a close, a fire ignited within me, a burning desire to forge a path that would not only secure my own future, but serve as a resounding declaration of my triumph over adversity. It was then that the seeds of my grand plan took root, a masterful scheme that would bring me face to face with the very people who had once sought to diminish me. But this time, the playing field would be tilted in my favor, and I would wield the power to exact the kind of retribution they had once deemed me unworthy of. With Eli by my side, I poured every ounce of my being into crafting a tech startup that would revolutionize the world of digital security. Our innovative approach quickly gained traction, and before long, we found ourselves at the helm of a burgeoning empire, one built on the foundations of our unwavering determination and shared belief in the power of resilience. As our success mounted, whispers began to circulate, whispers that eventually reached the ears of those who had once cast me aside like a blemish to be hidden away. And it was then that the true reckoning began to take shape, a masterful plan that would bring my parents to their knees, forcing them to confront the consequences of their shallow cruelty in the most public and humiliating of ways. The day of my college graduation was a pivotal moment, a turning point where the past and the future collided in a perfect storm of reckoning. As I stood there, basking in the warmth of accomplishment, a familiar presence caught my eye. My parents, hovering awkwardly at the edges of the celebration. For a fleeting moment, a part of me yearned for their embrace, for the unconditional love and pride that should have been my birthright. But the memories of their cruelty were too fresh, too deeply etched into the fabric of my being, and I steeled myself against the flicker of hope that threatened to ignite within me. As the crowd dispersed, they approached me with hesitant steps, their faces a carefully crafted mask of forced enthusiasm. "Cassie, darling," my mother cooed, her eyes darting nervously towards the prominent birthmark that had once been the source of so much derision. "We're so proud of you." My father nodded in agreement, his smile strained and insincere. Who would have thought our little girl would turn into such a success? I bit back the bitter retort that danced on the tip of my tongue, schooling my features into a practiced expression of neutrality. They thought they could sweep back into my life, riding on the coattails of my accomplishments, as if the years of anguish and rejection had never occurred. "Thank you," I managed through gritted teeth, my voice devoid of warmth. "It's been a long road, but I've made it." They shifted uncomfortably, sensing the undercurrent of tension that crackled between us like a live wire. It was Eli who stepped in, his presence a grounding force in the midst of the storm. "Cassie's worked harder than anyone I know," he interjected, his arm draped protectively around my shoulders. "She's going to change the world with her ideas." My parents' gazes flickered to him, curiosity mingling with a hint of envy at the easy camaraderie between us. "Well, that's just wonderful," my mother gushed, her tone saccharine sweet. "And we're sure you'll remember your family when you've made it big, won't you, dear?" The implication was clear. They expected to bask in the glow of my success, to reap the rewards without ever having sown the seeds of support and encouragement that I had so desperately craved. It was in that moment that the seeds of my grand plan took root, a deliciously devious scheme that would bring them to their knees, forcing them to confront the true depth of their shallowness and the price they would pay for their cruelty. With a saccharine smile, I nodded in acquiescence, playing the part of the dutiful daughter they had always longed for. "Of course, Mother, Father," I murmured, my voice dripping with false sincerity. "I would never dream of forgetting the people who made me who I am today." Their faces lit up with smug satisfaction, oblivious to the subtle shift in the power dynamic that had just occurred. They thought they had me firmly in their grasp, a puppet dancing on the strings of their expectations. Little did they know that I was the true master of this game, and the stage was already being set for their ultimate downfall. In the months that followed, Eli and I poured every ounce of our beings into crafting a tech startup that would revolutionize the world of digital security. Our innovative approach quickly gained traction, and before long we found ourselves at the helm of a burgeoning empire, one built on the foundations of our unwavering determination and shared belief in the power of resilience. As our success mounted, whispers began to circulate. Whispers that eventually reached the ears of my parents, who had long since squandered their own wealth on ill-advised ventures and lavish indulgences. It was then that they came crawling back, their pride crumbling in the face of financial ruin and the promise of my newfound affluence. "Cassie, my dear," my mother simpered, her voice thick with false endearment. "We've been so worried about you, out there in the big city all alone." My father nodded gravely, his eyes alight with greed. "Your mother and I were hoping we could reconnect, catch up on old times. Maybe you could help us out a little, now that you've made it big." I regarded them coolly, my mask of indifference firmly in place as I took in their pathetic attempts at manipulation. "Of course," I replied, my tone carefully measured. "In fact, I have the perfect opportunity for us to reconnect. A lavish event to celebrate the launch of my latest venture." Their eyes widened with barely concealed avarice, visions of wealth and status dancing before their eyes. "We wouldn't miss it for the world," my father assured me, his hand already outstretched in anticipation of the riches he expected to be bestowed upon him. Little did they know that this grand event would be the stage upon which their world came crashing down around them, a public reckoning for the years of pain and humiliation they had inflicted upon me. As I watched them depart, their smug expressions etched into my memory, a slow, predatory smile spread across my face. The time for revenge had finally arrived, and they would soon learn the true depths of my resilience, a lesson that would forever shatter the illusion of their superficial superiority. The grand ballroom was a study in opulence, every inch meticulously curated to showcase the pinnacle of success and sophistication. But beneath the glittering chandeliers and sumptuous decorations lay a far more sinister purpose, the stage upon which my long-awaited reckoning would finally unfold. As guests began to trickle in, their faces a sea of eager anticipation, I caught sight of my parents making their grand entrance. They cut an ostentatious figure, clad in their finest attire, as if to compensate for their recent financial woes. "Cassie, darling!" my mother trilled, her voice dripping with false warmth as she swept towards me, arms outstretched in a parody of affection. "This is simply stunning. You've truly outdone yourself." My father nodded in agreement, his eyes greedily devouring the opulent surroundings. "Who would have thought our little girl had such exquisite taste?" he remarked, his tone laced with a hint of condescension. I schooled my features into a polite smile, tamping down the surge of disgust that threatened to rise within me. "Thank you, mother, father," I replied, my voice carefully neutral. "I'm glad you could make it." They preened under the attention, basking in the illusion of status and success that my empire had afforded them. Little did they know that this gilded facade was about to come crashing down around them in spectacular fashion. As the event progressed, I made a show of mingling with the esteemed guests, exchanging pleasantries and carefully cultivating an air of poise and confidence. All the while, I kept a watchful eye on my parents, noting their increasingly boastful behavior as they regaled anyone within earshot with tales of their supposed role in my success. "Of course, we always knew our Cassie was destined for greatness," my mother simpered, her voice carrying across the crowded room. "She gets her drive and ambition from us, you know." My father nodded sagely, puffing out his chest with misplaced pride. "It's in her blood," he proclaimed, his gaze sweeping over the assembled guests as if daring them to challenge his authority. It was then that I made my move, gliding towards the center of the room with a practiced grace that belied the fury simmering beneath the surface. "Esteemed guests, family, and friends," I began, my voice ringing out clear and confident. "Thank you all for joining me on this momentous occasion." A hush fell over the crowd as all eyes turned towards me, drawn in by the commanding presence I exuded. "Tonight we celebrate not just the launch of a groundbreaking new venture, but the triumph of resilience over adversity," I continued, my gaze flickering towards my parents, who beamed with smug satisfaction. "You see, my success was not born of privilege or legacy, but rather forged in the fires of rejection and cruelty at the hands of those who should have been my staunchest supporters." A ripple of murmurs rippled through the crowd, and I caught sight of my parents' expressions shifting from self-assured to uneasy. From a young age, I was made to feel ashamed of my appearance, ridiculed and belittled by the very people who brought me into this world, I declared, my voice ringing with conviction. My own parents saw fit to treat me as a blemish, a source of embarrassment to be hidden from the world. Gasps of shock and outrage echoed through the room, and my parents' faces drained of color as they realized the trap they had so blindly stumbled into. But tonight, I stand before you as living proof that true beauty lies not in superficial perfection, but in the strength of character and the indomitable spirit that refuses to be diminished by the cruelty of others. I turned to face my parents directly, their expressions a twisted mask of horror and disbelief. "You sought to break me, to mold me into a shell of a person ashamed of her own existence," I spat, my words laced with the venom of years of pent-up anguish. "But in doing so, you only strengthened my resolve to rise above your shallow judgments and carve my own path to success." The silence in the room was deafening, punctuated only by the occasional gasp or murmur of outrage. My parents, once so assured in their perceived superiority, now cowered before the weight of their own cruelty laid bare for all to witness. "Tonight, you reap the bitter harvest of your actions," I proclaimed, my voice ringing out like a judge's gavel. "For your superficial values and toxic behavior, you will be shunned and ostracized, stripped of the very status you so coveted." Their faces contorted in anguish, but I felt no pity, only a sense of cathartic release, as the weight of years of torment finally lifted from my shoulders. As they were unceremoniously escorted from the premises, their pleas for mercy falling on deaf ears, I stood tall and resolute, a beacon of strength and resilience in the face of adversity. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. For in that moment, I vowed to dedicate my life to empowering others who had faced similar struggles, to be the guiding light that would illuminate the path to self-acceptance and triumph over those who sought to diminish their worth. My journey had been one of pain and hardship, but it was also a testament to the indomitable power of the human spirit, a spirit that could never be extinguished, no matter how relentless the onslaught of cruelty and judgment. and as I looked out over the awestruck faces of those who had borne witness to my reckoning, I knew that my story was just beginning. A story that would inspire generations to come and shatter the shackles of society's narrow definitions of beauty and worth. The days following my public reckoning were a whirlwind of chaos and consequences. As word of my parents' cruelty spread like wildfire, they found themselves swiftly ostracized from the very social circles they had once so desperately clung to. Invitations to exclusive events were abruptly rescinded, and doors that had once been flung open now slammed shut in their faces. The facade of respectability they had so carefully constructed lay in tatters, exposed for the hollow sham it truly was. Yet, even in the face of their mounting isolation, they remained steadfast in their delusions of entitlement, lashing out at me with the same vitriol that had fueled their actions for years. "You ungrateful wretch," my mother screeched, her perfectly coiffed hair askew as she pounded on the door of my penthouse suite. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" My father's voice echoed her outrage, his tone laced with thinly veiled threats. "You'll regret this, Cassie. Mark my words, we'll make sure you pay for your insolence." I watched their tirade unfold through the security camera feed, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. Gone were the days when their words held the power to shatter my resolve. In their place was a quiet confidence, a knowledge that I had finally seized control of my own narrative. With a few strategic keystrokes, I set in motion the next phase of my plan. A legal and financial reckoning that would strip them of the last vestiges of their ill-gotten wealth and status. It didn't take long for the authorities to uncover the web of deceit and questionable business practices that had fueled my parents' lavish lifestyle. As the evidence mounted, the full extent of their misdeeds came to light: tax evasion, embezzlement, and a litany of other white-collar crimes that had been carefully concealed behind a veneer of respectability. Within weeks, they found themselves embroiled in a legal nightmare, their assets frozen, and their once pristine reputations dragged through the mud of public scrutiny. It was during one of their court appearances that our paths crossed again, their once polished appearances now disheveled and haggard. "Cassie," my father croaked, his eyes pleading with me from across the sterile courtroom, "please, you have to help us. This has all been a terrible misunderstanding." My mother clutched at my arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my flesh. "We're your parents, damn it!" she hissed, her voice thick with desperation. "You owe us everything." I regarded them coolly, unmoved by their theatrics. "I owe you nothing," I stated, my tone flat and devoid of emotion. "You made your choices, and now you must face the consequences." Their faces twisted in anguish, the weight of their own actions finally bearing down upon them with crushing force. "But we're family," my mother whimpered, a pitiful shell of the imperious woman she had once been. I leveled my gaze at them, my resolve unwavering. "Family doesn't treat their own like a blemish to be hidden away," I countered. "Family doesn't inflict the kind of cruelty and abuse that you so readily embraced." A hush fell over the courtroom as my words sank in, each syllable a damning indictment of their failures as parents and human beings. "You had a choice," I continued, my voice steady and resolute. "You could have chosen to love and accept me for who I am, but instead you allowed your own shallow values to dictate your actions." They shrank back, the realization of their mistakes finally dawning upon them in the harsh light of truth. "And now, you must live with the consequences of those choices," I declared, my words ringing out like a judge's gavel. "You will face the full weight of the law, and when the dust settles, you will be stripped of everything, your wealth, your status, and any lingering illusions of superiority." My parents recoiled as if struck, their faces contorted in a mix of rage and fear. "But know this," I added, leaning in closer with a steely glint in my eye. "Even after you have paid your debt to society, even after you have been reduced to nothing, I will still stand tall, a testament to the resilience and strength that you so foolishly underestimated." With those parting words, I turned on my heel and strode out of the courtroom, leaving them to grapple with the ruins of their once charmed existence. In that moment, I felt a sense of cathartic release, a weight lifted from my shoulders that had been bearing down upon me for far too long. The cycle of abuse and cruelty had finally been broken, and I was free to forge ahead on my own terms, unburdened by the shackles of their toxic influence. As I stepped out into the sunlight, a new chapter unfolded before me, one filled with the promise of redemption and the opportunity to help others who had faced similar struggles. For in my triumph over adversity, I had become a beacon of hope, a living embodiment of the indomitable human spirit that refuses to be diminished by the cruelty of others. And as I looked towards the horizon, I knew that my journey was far from over. But this time, I walked the path of my own choosing, forged by the fires of resilience that had tempered my soul and steeled my resolve. The aftermath of my parents' downfall was a whirlwind of emotions, a heady mix of vindication and newfound purpose. As the dust settled and the world bore witness to the consequences of their actions, a profound shift occurred within me. No longer was I shackled by the weight of their toxic influence, burdened by the constant need to prove my worth in the face of their shallow judgments. Instead, a newfound sense of freedom and clarity washed over me, ushering in a determination to channel my hard-won triumph into something greater than myself. It was during this time of reflection that Lily, my steadfast ally and surrogate mother, reached out to me with a proposition that would set the course for the next chapter of my life. "Cassie," she began, her voice warm and filled with pride, "what you've accomplished is nothing short of remarkable, but I sense that this is just the beginning for you." I nodded, my fingers idly tracing the outline of the birthmark that had once been a source of such anguish. Now it stood as a badge of honor, a testament to the resilience that had carried me through the darkest of times. "I want to help others like me, Lily," I confided, my voice steady and resolute. "Too many people are made to feel ashamed and diminished because of things they can't control, their appearance, their disabilities, their circumstances." Lily's eyes shone with a mix of pride and understanding. "And that's precisely why I think you should consider starting a foundation." Or, she suggested, her words igniting a spark within me. The idea took root instantly, a vision of a safe haven for those who had faced similar struggles, a place where they could find acceptance, support, and the tools to thrive in a world that too often judged based on superficial standards. A foundation dedicated to empowering individuals and challenging society's narrow definitions of beauty and worth, I mused, the possibilities unfolding before me like an intricate tapestry. Lily nodded, her smile widening. "Exactly. With your platform and resources, you could make a real difference in the lives of so many people who feel lost and alone." Without hesitation, I knew this was my calling. A chance to take the lessons learned from my own journey and transform them into a beacon of hope for others. In the weeks that followed, I poured myself into the creation of the Resilience Foundation, assembling a team of like-minded individuals who shared my vision of a more inclusive and compassionate world. Eli, my loyal friend and business partner, was the first to join the cause, his unwavering support a constant source of strength. "You know I'm with you every step of the way, Cass," he declared, his eyes alight with determination. "This is bigger than revenge. It's about creating a legacy that will outlive us all." One by one, others followed suit, drawn to the powerful message of resilience and self-acceptance that lay at the heart of our mission. Counselors, educators, and advocates from all walks of life rallied to our cause, each bringing their own unique perspectives and experiences to the table. As the foundation took shape, so too did the scope of our impact. We launched outreach programs in schools and communities, providing resources and support for those struggling with societal pressures and discrimination. I found myself speaking at events and conferences, sharing my story and inspiring others to embrace their own unique qualities with pride and confidence. "You are not defined by the labels others place upon you," I would declare to rapt audiences. "True beauty lies within, in the strength of character and the indomitable spirit that refuses to be diminished by the cruelty of others." My words resonated deeply, striking a chord with those who had long felt marginalized and unseen. And with each triumph, each life touched by our message, I felt a profound sense of purpose and fulfillment that eclipsed any lingering bitterness or resentment towards my parents. For in the end, my journey had not been one of revenge, but of transformation, a metamorphosis from a wounded soul to a beacon of hope and resilience. And as I stood at the helm of the Resilience Foundation, surrounded by a community of kindred spirits, I knew that my story was far from over. It was merely the beginning of a legacy that would inspire generations to come, a testament to the indomitable power of the human spirit and the triumph of self-acceptance over society's narrow confines. As I looked towards the future, I felt a sense of peace and purpose that had once seemed so elusive, a deep understanding that true beauty lies not in physical perfection, but in the unwavering determination to embrace one's authentic self, flaws, imperfections, and all. And in that moment, I knew that my greatest victory had not been in exacting revenge upon those who had wronged me, but in rising above their limitations and forging a path that would forever shatter the shackles of society's narrow definitions of worth.